Well, here's a couple of pictures from our deck yesterday, taken towards the lake and showing you some of the color that's here on the mountain. Yes, we are blessed. Well, we're in the book of Daniel, chapter 5. We're the shortest of the major prophets, 12,100 words. Only thing shorter in what's considered major prophets is Lamentations, but that's only included because Jeremiah wrote it. In any case, we're in 605 down to 536 BC. Daniel has been taken captive in 605 and dragged out to Babylon, where they've tried to convert him to Babylonian ways of thinking. And he's steadfast in his faith and trust in God. And we find a great deal of interesting things in the book of Daniel. But today in chapter 5, we have a little bit of confusion in the fact that we have two names that are very similar. We have Belteshazzar and we have Belshazzar. Belshazzar is the king after Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. Belshazzar is a name that was given to Daniel as a Babylonian name. But we're not talking about Daniel here. We're talking about, in chapter 5, the king that followed Nebuchadnezzar. And he's filled with pride, very much like Nebuchadnezzar had a problem with pride. And he's drinking fine wine. And he decides to bring out some gold and silver vessels that have been taken from Jerusalem in the temple, and passes those containers out so that the wine can be drunk from those. And they basically are celebrating and praising the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. But we all know that God's not going to stand still for that. Let's take a look and see what happens next. Suddenly, the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand and that did the writing. What would you do if you saw something like that? Well, the king was pale, he was alarmed, and his knees were knocking, and you can understand why. He called all of his conjurers and all of his seers and all of those special magicians that he had and asked them to explain and interpret what that handwriting on the wall was. And he also offered a great deal of reward if they could give the interpretation. He said he would give them purple garments to wear, a gold necklace around their neck, and that they would be third in rule over the kingdom. But they couldn't do it. None of them could interpret what was written on the wall. None of them could tell the king what it meant. And so he was even more alarmed and more perplexed. But the queen came in and she said, I know of someone who is very good at interpreting dreams, interpreting signs and wonders, and just as he did for your father Nebuchadnezzar. And so she told him about Daniel. And Daniel was summoned to come and give the king an interpretation of what was written on the wall. And Daniel was offered the same kind of rewards that the seers and the magicians have been offered: purple garments, a gold necklace, and third in command. But Daniel said, keep your gifts. I guess he knew because of the interpretation, it didn't make much difference whether he got those gifts or not. But anyway, he said, keep your gifts. I'm going to interpret for you what is written on the wall. But first he was going to give him a little lesson. He said, your father Nebuchadnezzar was given great power. And in his pride, God took away that power, made him like a wild animal out in the woods eating on grass, until he came to his senses and recognized that God is the God Most High, and that he is the ruler of all mankind. But you have a lesson to learn. So let's look and see what he said. Yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines have been drinking wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver, gold, and of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which do not see, hear, or understand, but the God in whose hand are your life breath and all of your ways you have not glorified. Daniel read what was on the wall to the king, what the wall said. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. He said to him very clearly, your God has said to you that your days are numbered. Your kingdom will come to an end. You've been weighed on a scale and found deficient. And your personal kingdom will be divided over the Medes and the Persians. That same night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. That's what you call a short-term prophecy. He prophesied it that day, and that very night the king was killed, and the kingdom was divided between the Medes and the Persians. So we know that God is faithful in his fulfilling his prophecies, but not usually that quickly. In any case, we've talked about the fact that it's important not just to see this as history of what happened to Daniel while he was in captivity in Babylon, but also we need to apply it to our lives. So what do we apply this to our lives? Well, unlike Belshazzar, who didn't learn from the past, we need to learn from the past. If we make a mistake, or if our parents make a mistake, or we see a mistake made by others, we need to learn from those things. This king did not learn that. He didn't learn from his father's bad experiences and pride and not understanding that you don't mock the living God. Secondly, we need to be sure that we don't take things too lightly, things about God. What was there a real significance of the fact that these chalices and these containers had been used in a temple for worship of God and then were used for such a common purpose? Yes, we need to be careful that we don't take the things of God too lightly. We need to be careful that we don't use his name lightly. We don't say, oh God, this or oh God, that, when in fact we're not praying to him, but we're just using his name in a very lighthearted manner. And so we need to be very careful about the things of God and how we handle our Bibles, how we treat our Bibles, how we treat the things of God, and how we treat the house of God. And I, as a pastor for 35 years, I used to get unglued when I would find bubble gum and wrappers and candy strewn around the floor of the sanctuary after a worship service, or stuck to the bottom of a pew, or put into the book rack with the books. It's for us to treat the things of God with respect and honor. And finally, we need to acknowledge that there's one true God. All of these things that we can attach to our dashboards, hang from our rearview mirrors, these things that we hang around our neck, they're not God's. They may be there to remind us of the presence of God. They may be there for good purposes, but they're not God's. And they're not to be worshiped. They're not to be held in superstition. But we know that we have a living God, one that we can talk to at any time, one who hears and one who understands our hearts and knows our inner thoughts. We can't hide anything from him. So let's be careful how we treat him, how we speak about him, and what we do with him. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.